I grew up in a small town, in one of those big, beautiful houses that make people slow down as they drive past. It wasn't because we were rich or anything, the house was actually inherited from my grandfather. My family was pretty ordinary. Dad worked long shifts at the local factory, and Mom spent her days behind the counter at Marshall's Bakery. Then there was my brother Matthew, Matt, as everyone called him. He was 7 years older than me, which meant he was always doing everything first, setting the bar impossibly high. I still remember the day Grandma came over with those envelopes, one for each of us. Inside each was a check for $30,000, meant for college. Now you both can get a proper education, Grandma said proudly, but Matt had other ideas. I've been thinking, he announced at dinner that night, pushing his peas around his plate. Instead of college, I want to open my own business. There's no decent scooter shop in town, and with all the kids getting into them lately. Mom nearly dropped her fork. But Matthew, the money is for college. College isn't the only path to success, Mom, Matt argued, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. I've done the research. This could be huge. Dad leaned back in his chair, studying Matt carefully. You've really thought this through? Every detail, Matt nodded. I already have suppliers lined up, and I found the perfect location downtown. To everyone's surprise, especially mine, Matt's business took off. Within months, his little scooter shop became the go-to place for everything on two wheels. The pride in our parents' eyes was unmistakable. I was 16 when everything fell apart. I remember sitting at the dinner table, doing my homework, when the phone rang. Mom answered it, and I watched as the color drained from her face. It's Matt, she whispered to Dad. There's been an accident. The next few hours were a blur of hospital corridors and doctors' voices. Matt had crashed his scooter, and the damage was catastrophic, multiple spinal fractures, complete immobilization. I stood in the doorway of his hospital room, barely recognizing my strong, confident brother in the broken figure before me. The store, he croaked when he first regained consciousness. Someone needs to. But there was no one. Matt had always insisted on doing everything himself, proud of being a one-man operation. Now, with him confined to a hospital bed, the shop sat empty. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. The temporarily closed sign in the window began to fade in the sun, and eventually, Matt had to face reality. He was bankrupt. Everything he'd built had to be sold off, piece by piece. The bills started arriving before Matt even left the hospital. Each time Dad opened another envelope, his shoulders would slump a little more. The costs were astronomical, each surgery, each specialist, each day in the hospital added to a mounting pile of debt that seemed impossible to overcome. Insurance will only cover 60%, Dad announced one evening, his voice hollow as he spread the papers across our kitchen table. And there's a cap. Mom wiped her hands on her apron, still dusted with flour from the bakery. We have our savings. It's not enough, Dad replied quietly. Not even close. They sold Matt's store, what was left of it anyway? The money helped, but it was like throwing a bucket of water on a forest fire. Matt needed more surgeries, more specialists, more rehabilitation. I'd overhear my parents talking late into the night, their voices strained with worry. Then one morning, Mom and Dad called a family meeting. We've made a decision, Dad said, looking older than I'd ever seen him. We're going to sell the house. The words hit me like a physical blow. This house, where I'd grown up, where every doorframe had pencil marks tracking our heights, where Grandpa's presence still lingered in the creaky third step and the rose bushes he'd planted. But where will we go? I asked, my voice small. There's a 2-bedroom apartment on Cedar Street, Mom explained, not quite meeting my eyes. It's cozy. Cozy was an understatement. When we moved in, Matt and I had to share a room, his hospital bed taking up most of the space, my twin bed squeezed into the corner. The walls were thin enough that I could hear the neighbor's TV through them, and the whole place smelled faintly of someone else's cooking. But even selling our beautiful house wasn't enough. Matt remained bedridden, needing constant care. I started working as a waitress at Luigi's restaurant after school, carrying plates, learning to balance trays, coming home with aching feet and smelling of garlic and pasta sauce. "You don't have to do this," Matt told me one night, his voice thick with guilt as I rubbed my sore feet. "We're family," I replied, but the words felt hollow, rehearsed. Then came another family meeting. Mom stood in our cramped living room, wringing her hands. "We can't afford a nurse for Matthew," she announced. "I've done the math 100 ways, but we just can't. I'll have to quit my job at the bakery to take care of him." And just like that, our family income was cut in half. Now it was just Dad at the factory and me with my serving job keeping us afloat. I'd watch Mom tenderly caring for Matt, helping him with his exercises, changing his sheets, giving him his medications, and I'd wonder how much longer we could all go on like this. I knew what was coming even before they said it. Mom and Dad had been exchanging those meaningful looks for days, having whispered conversations that stopped when I entered the room. Finally, they sat me down at our small kitchen table one evening after my shift at the restaurant. "Honey," Mom started, reaching for my hand. "We need to talk about your college fund. The $30,000 from Grandma." I'd been guarding it religiously in my savings account, watching it sit untouched while I worked double shifts serving pasta and pizza. It was my ticket to college, my chance at a different life. "Matt needs another surgery," Dad explained, his voice rough. "The rehabilitation isn't progressing as well as we hoped, and there's a new procedure that could help, but..." "How much do you need?" I heard myself ask. The words came automatically, there was never really any question about what I would do. We were family, after all. "All of it," Mom whispered, tears in her eyes. I signed the papers the next day, transferring every penny to my parents' account. It felt strange watching my college dreams disappear with a few strokes of a pen, but I told myself it was worth it when I saw Matt starting to make progress in his rehabilitation. That's where he met Sarah. She was a nurse at the rehabilitation center, pretty, with kind eyes and a gentle way of helping patients. I noticed how Matt's face would light up whenever she entered the room. "She's different from other girls," he told me one evening. "She really understands what I'm going through." Sarah started coming over for dinner. She'd sit at our cramped table, telling stories about her difficult life that made Mom tear up and Dad shake his head sympathetically. "I've been couch surfing for months," she'd say, pushing food around her plate. "It's so hard not having a real home, you know? No family to turn to." "You poor dear," Mom would respond, already halfway to adopting her. I watched all this from my spot at the table, serving up dinner in between my restaurant shifts. Sarah's stories always seemed to end with hints about needing help or support, and my parents ate it up. Maybe I should have seen what was coming, but I was too busy trying to keep our family afloat. The months flew by, and suddenly I was 18, graduating high school with no college plans in sight. My $30,000 was long gone, spent on Matt's treatments and rehabilitation. While my classmates excitedly discussed dorm room decorations and freshman orientation, I was negotiating for full-time hours at the restaurant. "You're one of our best servers," my manager told me as he approved my new schedule. "Are you sure you don't want to take some classes at the community college?" I just smiled and shook my head. College wasn't in the cards for me anymore. I had bills to help pay, a family to support, and a brother who still needed constant care. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, and not necessarily for the better. I knew something was wrong the moment I walked through the door after my evening shift. Mom and Dad were sitting at the kitchen table, still dressed despite the late hour. The air felt heavy with unspoken words. "Sit down, Allison," Dad said, not quite meeting my eyes. "We need to talk." I slid into a chair, still wearing my sauce-stained apron. My feet ached from a 10-hour shift, but something in their expressions made me forget about my fatigue. "You're 18 now," Mom started, her hands fidgeting with a napkin. "An adult." "What's going on?" I asked, though a sick feeling in my stomach told me I didn't want to know. Mom glanced at Dad before continuing. "We need you to move out, immediately." The words hit me like a slap. "What?" "Sarah's going to move in," Mom explained, as if that made everything okay. "Matthew asked her to. They're in love, and it would be so good for him to have her here." But where am I supposed to go? My voice cracked. This is my home. Let's be realistic, Dad cut in. The apartment's too small for all of us. And Sarah, well, she's probably Matt's only chance at a real relationship. What other girl would want to be with someone in his condition? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So you're choosing her over me? Your own daughter? Don't be dramatic, Mom sighed. You have some money saved up from your job. You can find a place to rent. I wanted to laugh, but it came out as more of a sob. Money? What money? I gave everything I had to Matt's treatment. Every penny of my college fund, half of every paycheck I earn. I can barely afford a cup of coffee after paying for all his rehabilitation. You should be ashamed of yourself, Mom snapped, her eyes flashing. Throwing that in our faces. He's your brother, Allison. You were obligated to help him. Family helps family. Family helps family? I repeated incredulously. Then what exactly are you doing right now? We're helping your brother, Dad said firmly. He needs Sarah. She can take care of him in ways that we can't. You need to understand that. Understand what? I shot back, tears streaming down my face now. That after everything I've sacrificed, my college fund, my future, my savings, you're throwing me out on the street to make room for some girl who's known Matt for less than a year? That's enough. Mom slammed her hand on the table. This isn't up for discussion. You need to be out by tomorrow night. I stared at my parents, these strangers wearing my parents' faces, and felt something inside me break. Everything I'd done, every sacrifice I'd made, meant nothing to them. I was disposable, replaceable. And now I was homeless. That night, I threw everything I owned into 2 suitcases and a backpack. Jenny, my coworker from Luigi's, answered my tearful phone call without hesitation. Of course you can stay with me, she said. Come over right now. Jenny's apartment was on the opposite side of town, in one of those old buildings where the elevator perpetually smelled like cabbage and the pipes clanked all night long. Her place was tiny, just one room with a kitchenette, but at that moment, it looked like paradise to me. It's not much, Jenny apologized, helping me drag my suitcases up 4 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken again. But we'll make it work. That first night, I slept on an air mattress that slowly deflated throughout the night, leaving me practically on the floor by morning. The next day, I had to wake up 2 hours earlier than usual to make the long commute to work. 3 different buses, rain or shine. We'll split everything 50-50, Jenny insisted as we worked out our budget over cheap takeout noodles. Rent, utilities, groceries. Even splitting the costs, money was tight. The long commute ate up a chunk of my earnings in bus fare. Some nights, dinner was just ramen noodles or peanut butter sandwiches. We learned to be creative with our space. My air mattress had to be deflated and stored in a corner during the day so we could actually move around the apartment. After a few weeks of sleeping on the slowly dying air mattress, I found a beat-up bed frame and mattress at a thrift store. Jenny helped me drag it home piece by piece on the bus, earning us quite a few strange looks. That bed wasn't much, but it was mine. I remember lying in it that first night, listening to the rattling radiator and distant sirens, feeling strangely proud. For the first time in years, my paycheck was my own. Living with Jenny wasn't always easy. The apartment was so small that we had to coordinate our movements like dancers, one person cooking while the other sat on their bed, taking turns in the tiny bathroom, scheduling our showers so we'd both have hot water. In summer, the single-window unit AC struggled to cool even half the room. In winter, we huddled under blankets because the heating was unreliable. But there were good times too. Late-night talks over hot chocolate when neither of us could sleep. Laughing until we cried at terrible movies on Jenny's laptop. Learning to cook together in our microscopic kitchen, setting off the smoke detector more times than I care to admit. For 2 years, this was my life. I picked up extra shifts whenever I could, learned every shortcut on the bus route, and slowly started to heal from my family's betrayal. Then came the promotion I'd been working toward, restaurant administrator. The pay increase meant I could finally afford my own place, a small studio apartment just 3 blocks from the restaurant. The day I signed the lease, I cried. It wasn't much, just one room with a kitchenette and a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in, but it was mine. All mine. For the first time since leaving my parents' apartment, I started to feel hopeful about the future. I created a budget, allocating a portion of each paycheck to savings. Some months I could only save $20, but it was something. Slowly, my college fund started to grow again. I still lived frugally, shopping at discount stores, using coupons, walking instead of taking the bus when weather permitted. My furniture was all secondhand, my clothes from clearance racks. But every night, I'd sit at my small secondhand desk, looking at my growing savings account, and feel something I hadn't felt in years: pride. "You've got real potential, Allison," Mr. Romano, the restaurant owner, told me one morning during our weekly meeting. "I'm giving you another raise, but I want you to seriously think about college. With a degree, you could manage multiple locations, maybe even run your own restaurant someday." With the latest raise, I could finally afford a bigger apartment, a real one-bedroom with a proper living room and a kitchen where I could actually fit a full-sized refrigerator. I'd become something of an expert at packing and unpacking, at making new spaces feel like home. 4 apartments in 3 years, each one a step up from the last, each one representing another small victory. Life settled into a comfortable routine. Work kept me busy, and while I didn't talk to my parents or Matthew anymore, I stayed in touch with Aunt Linda. Our weekly phone calls became a highlight. She never judged, just listened and offered gentle advice when asked. "You're doing so well, sweetheart," she'd say. "I'm proud of you." Then came the knock that changed everything. It was a Sunday afternoon. I just finished organizing my new bookshelf when I heard it, 3 sharp raps on my door. When I looked through the peephole, my heart stopped. There stood my parents, looking older but painfully familiar. My first thought was that Aunt Linda must have told them where I lived. My second thought was that maybe, after all this time, they'd finally come to apologize. Why else would they be here? With shaking hands, I opened the door. "Allison," Mom breathed, her eyes scanning my face. "You look well." I stepped aside to let them in, noticing how they surveyed my apartment with appraising eyes. "This is a beautiful place," Dad commented, running his hand along my new kitchen counter. "You've done well for yourself." Before I could respond, Mom burst into tears. Sarah left Matthew. And there it was, the real reason for their visit. "She just walked out," Mom continued, sinking onto my couch without invitation. "After everything we did for her. She didn't contribute a single penny to his care, spent all her money on clothes and makeup. She posted the most horrible things on Facebook," Dad added, his face red with anger. "Said she was tired of playing nurse to a cripple, that she'd found someone a hole." I stood there, listening to them rant about Sarah's betrayal, about how she'd used Matthew, about how cruel she'd been. All I could think about was the day they'd thrown me out of our apartment to make room for her. "You know," Mom said, still dabbing at her eyes, "your old room is empty now. You could come back home." I let out a laugh that sounded more like a bark. "Come back? Are you serious?" "Well, why not?" Mom looked around my apartment again. "Though this place is much nicer than ours." "Actually," Dad cut in, leaning forward in his chair, "we were thinking, since you have all this space, and you're doing so well financially, maybe we could all move in here? The whole family together again." In that moment, everything became crystal clear. This wasn't about reconciliation. This wasn't about missing me. This was about money again. Something inside me snapped. "Get out," I said quietly. "Excuse me?" Mom's eyes widened. "Get out," I screamed, not caring who heard. "You throw me out on the street at 18, after I gave you every penny I had, after I worked my fingers to the bone to help Matt, after I gave up my college dreams, and now you have the nerve to show up here because you want my money again?" "Allison, please," Dad started. "No. You don't get to Allison, please me. You kicked out your own daughter to make room for some stranger who ended up abandoning Matt anyway. Do you have any idea what that did to me? Sleeping on an air mattress, taking 3 buses to work, eating ramen for weeks straight? We did what we had to, Mom tried to interrupt. What you had to? You had to throw your teenage daughter out on the street? You had to choose a stranger over your own child? Get out of my apartment. I physically pushed them toward the door, my hands shaking with rage. And don't you dare come back. Ever. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Aunt Linda. Allison, honey, I heard about what happened yesterday. You can't treat your parents like that. They threw me out, I cut her off. When I was 18. Did they tell you that part? They kicked me out of the house to make room for Matt's girlfriend. Silence on the other end. After I gave them my entire college fund. After I worked double shifts to help pay for Matt's treatment. They threw me out like I was nothing. They, what? Aunt Linda's voice was barely a whisper. Yeah, told me I had to be out by the next day. No warning, no help finding a place, nothing. Just, get out. I heard Aunt Linda take a sharp breath. Why didn't you tell me? I was ashamed, I admitted. And hurt. So hurt I couldn't even talk about it. Oh, Allison. There was a long pause. This isn't right. The family needs to know about this. And boy, did they find out. Aunt Linda made sure of that. Within days, my phone was blowing up with messages from relatives, aunts, uncles, cousins, all expressing their shock and outrage. The family grapevine was buzzing with the story of how Bill and Marie had treated their daughter. 3 years after that confrontation in my apartment, I found myself sitting in my first college classroom. Evening classes weren't easy, rushing from the restaurant to campus, studying late into the night, surviving on coffee and determination. But every time I walked into that classroom, I felt a surge of pride. This was my dream, finally becoming reality. My routine became a carefully orchestrated dance. Wake up early for the morning shift at the restaurant, manage the lunch rush, handle paperwork in the afternoon, then dash to campus for evening classes. This was my second chance at education, and I was grabbing it with both hands. You look tired, honey, Aunt Linda said during one of our weekly calls. She was still my connection to the family, keeping me updated on news I pretended not to care about. Matt's making progress, she mentioned casually one evening. The doctors say he might be able to walk with crutches soon. The physical therapy is really working this time. I listened, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Of course I was glad he was getting better, he was still my brother, after all. I heard through Aunt Linda that my parents had poured every penny they had into his rehabilitation. They'd taken out second mortgages, worked overtime, scraped and saved for every treatment. Your mother asks about you, Aunt Linda ventured carefully. They saw your name in the local paper, that article about the restaurant's expansion plans. They were proud. Don't please, I cut her off. I can't go back there. Sometimes, late at night when I was struggling with a particularly difficult assignment, I'd think about the $30,000 I gave them. That money had helped Matt, I could take some comfort in that. But the way they treated me afterward, that was something I couldn't forget. The memory of that night, being told to leave my home, still had the power to make my hands shake. People sometimes asked if I felt guilty about cutting ties with my family. My classmates would talk about their weekend plans with their parents, their family dinners, their holiday gatherings, and I'd feel their curious eyes on me when I stayed silent during these conversations. But they're your family, they'd say, when I finally explained my situation. Shouldn't you forgive them? The answer was always no. I'd sacrificed my education, my savings, my teenage years, all without complaint. I'd given until there was nothing left to give, and they'd still thrown me away like I meant nothing. Some betrayals run too deep for forgiveness. Family is important, a classmate told me once when I briefly mentioned my situation. Yes, I agreed. But so is self-respect. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away. Now, sitting at my desk in my apartment, surrounded by textbooks and homework assignments, I finally felt at peace with my decisions. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every bill paid, every good grade earned, these were my achievements, built on my own determination. The restaurant was doing well under my management, my grades were strong, and for the first time in years, I was excited about my future. I had plans, big ones. Maybe my own restaurant someday, or a whole chain of them. Dreams that once seemed impossible now felt within reach. Maybe someday they'd understand what they'd done. Maybe they'd realize that family means more than just taking, it means giving, supporting, loving unconditionally. But I wasn't waiting for that day anymore. I had my own life to live, my own dreams to chase.